Part 1. The Insult.
Margaret Williams had lived through 6 decades of life with grace, resilience, and an unwavering sense of dignity. At 60 years old, she was a woman who had weathered storms that would have broken lesser souls. She'd raised 2 children of her own, buried a husband she loved deeply, reinvented herself professionally 3 times, and had recently remarried a widower named Robert, hoping to find companionship in her golden years. Robert came with baggage, a 35-year-old son named Derek who had never quite warmed to the idea of his father remarrying, especially to Margaret. It was a Sunday afternoon in March when everything shifted. Margaret had spent the morning preparing dinner for the family, her famous honey-glazed salmon, roasted vegetables, and a peach cobbler that took hours to perfect. She'd set the table with care, hoping this meal would be a turning point, a moment where Derek might finally see her as family rather than an interloper. Derek arrived late, as usual, barely acknowledging her greeting. Throughout dinner, he scrolled through his phone, responding to his father in monosyllables. Margaret tried to engage him in conversation, asking about his new position at the marketing firm where he'd just been promoted to senior account manager. "How's the new role treating you, Derek?" she asked warmly, passing him the cobbler. He glanced up briefly, his eyes cold. "It's fine. Demanding. You wouldn't understand. It's a young person's game. Lots of late nights, high-pressure clients, cutting-edge digital strategies." Margaret smiled patiently. "I actually worked in advertising for 15 years before transitioning to. That was what, the 80s? 90s? Derek interrupted with a dismissive laugh. "Margaret, no offense, but the industry has completely changed. Everything's digital now, AI-driven, fast-paced. It's not like when you were working and people just made phone calls and sent faxes." Robert's fork clattered against his plate. "Derek, that's incredibly rude. Your stepmother has a wealth of experience." "Dad, come on. I'm just being realistic." Derek leaned back in his chair, his tone dripping with condescension. "Look, Margaret seems like a nice lady, but let's be honest. She's from a different generation. The world has moved on. She's too old to understand how things work now. No shame in that, it's just reality." The words hung in the air like poison. Too old. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, that had been broken before and healed. No, this was something else. This was her pride, her sense of self-worth, the very foundation of who she knew herself to be. She'd faced racism throughout her life, had fought tooth and nail for every opportunity, had proven herself over and over again in rooms where she was the only Black woman, the only woman, period. And now, this privileged young man who'd had every advantage handed to him was dismissing her entire existence because of her age. She set down her napkin with deliberate calm. "Excuse me," she said quietly, rising from the table. In the bathroom, Margaret stared at her reflection. Yes, there were lines around her eyes, laugh lines. She'd always called them. Yes, her hair was now more salt than pepper, though she wore it in elegant locks that framed her face beautifully. Yes, she was 60. But she was also sharp as a tack, with a master's degree in communications, decades of professional experience, and a mind that had never stopped learning, adapting, growing. Too old, she thought bitterly. Too old for what, exactly? That night, after Derek had left and Robert had apologized profusely for his son's behavior, Margaret lay awake. The insult had burrowed deep, not because she believed it, but because it represented something larger. The way society discarded women, especially Black women, once they reached a certain age. Invisible. Irrelevant. Past their expiration date. But Margaret Williams had never been one to accept other people's limitations. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done in years. She updated her LinkedIn profile. She reached out to old colleagues. She started researching companies, opportunities, ways to prove that she was anything but too old. What she didn't know yet was that Derek's boss, a man named Jonathan Pierce, was about to post about needing a consultant for a major rebranding project, and that Margaret's name would come up in the search, and that a chance coffee meeting would lead to something neither of them expected. Derek had thrown down a gauntlet without even realizing it, and Margaret Williams was about to pick it up and use it to reshape her entire life. The disrespect had planted a seed. Now it was time to watch it grow into something Derek would never see coming. 3 weeks after that disastrous dinner, Margaret found herself sitting in a sleek downtown coffee shop, nervously smoothing down her burgundy blazer. She'd been hesitant when her former colleague Patricia had suggested meeting Jonathan Pierce, the CEO of Elevation Marketing Group, the very company where Derek worked. He's looking for someone with traditional media experience to help bridge the gap with their digital strategies, Patricia had explained over the phone. You're perfect, Maggie. And trust me, Jonathan's not like these young tech brothers. He values wisdom. Margaret had almost said no. The idea of crossing paths with Derek's professional world felt uncomfortable. But then she remembered his words, too old, and something defiant flared inside her. She'd sent her portfolio. Jonathan Pierce arrived exactly on time, and Margaret's first thought was that he didn't look like a typical CEO. He was tall, maybe 58 or 59, with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He wore a tailored navy suit but had loosened his tie, and there was an ease about him that immediately put her at ease. Margaret Williams? He extended his hand. Jonathan Pierce. Patricia has told me so much about you that I feel like I'm meeting a legend. She laughed, her guard dropping slightly. I don't know about legend, but I've been around the block a few times. That's exactly what I need, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Someone who's been around the block and can tell me where all the potholes are. They talked for 2 hours. What started as a professional consultation evolved into something deeper, a genuine exchange of ideas, perspectives, war stories from their respective careers. Jonathan had built his company from the ground up 15 years ago and had recently realized his young, digital native team was brilliant but lacked the foundational understanding of brand storytelling that had made advertising an art form. They can make things go viral, he said, stirring his third coffee. But they can't always tell you why something resonates emotionally. That's where I need help. Margaret found herself leaning forward, animated in a way she hadn't been in months. Emotion is the foundation. You can have all the algorithms and analytics in the world, but if you don't understand human psychology, you're just making noise. Exactly. Jonathan's eyes lit up. Would you be willing to come on as a consultant? Maybe start with our healthcare client portfolio? I'll pay you well, very well. She should have said yes immediately. It was a fantastic opportunity, but something made her pause. Can I ask you something? Do you have an employee named Derek Williams? Jonathan's expression shifted slightly. I do. Derek's one of my senior account managers. Why do you ask? He's my stepson. She watched his face carefully. Would that be a problem? To her surprise, Jonathan laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. Derek's your stepson? That's interesting. He's talented but arrogant. Thinks he knows everything. Could use some humbling, honestly. He met her eyes. If anything, that makes me want to hire you more. No, it's not a problem at all. Margaret accepted the position that day. What she hadn't expected was how much she'd enjoy working with Jonathan over the following months. Their professional relationship deepened into friendship, and friendship into something neither of them had anticipated. They'd have working dinners that stretched late into the evening, conversations that ranged from advertising strategy to art, music, books, their late spouses, their hopes for the future. Jonathan had lost his wife to cancer 4 years earlier and had thrown himself into work to avoid the grief. I forgot how to be a person, he admitted one night over Thai food in his office. How to have conversations that aren't about quarterly projections. I know that feeling, Margaret said softly. After James died, I was just going through motions. Then I married Robert, thinking companionship was enough. But I forgot that I still had things to offer the world. That I was still vital. You're more than vital, Margaret. Jonathan's gaze was intense. You're extraordinary. The way your mind works, the way you see connections others miss, I haven't felt this creatively energized in years. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Their first kiss happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in June, in the parking garage after a particularly successful client presentation. Margaret had been laughing about something, rain-soaked and radiant, and Jonathan had simply cupped her face and kissed her. When they pulled apart, both were stunned. "I'm sorry," he started, but she stopped him. "Don't be." "But, Jonathan, this is complicated. I'm married. You're my employer. And Derek." "I know." He stepped back, running a hand through his wet hair. "I know it's complicated. But, Margaret, I haven't felt this alive in years. Tell me you don't feel it too." She couldn't, because she did feel it, this electric connection, this sense that she'd found someone who saw her completely, who valued her mind and her heart, and didn't think she was too old for anything. The next week, Margaret asked Robert for a divorce. It was painful but honest. "You're a good man," she told him gently. "But we both know this marriage was about companionship, not passion. And I deserve passion. Even at 60. Especially at 60. Robert, to his credit, understood. Derek, predictably, was furious, though not for the reasons Margaret expected. "You're embarrassing, Dad," he'd shouted when he found out. "Running off like some teenager. God, this is pathetic." Margaret had simply smiled. "I'm choosing myself, Derek. Something you've always had the luxury of doing without anyone calling it pathetic." 3 months later, on a perfect September afternoon, Margaret Williams became Margaret Pierce in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Jonathan's vows made her cry. "You taught me that life doesn't end at 50 or 60. It just gets richer if you're brave enough to keep growing." What Derek didn't know yet, what no one had told him, was that Jonathan had restructured the company. His new wife, with her decades of experience and fresh perspective, wasn't just a consultant anymore. Margaret Pierce was now Executive Vice President of Brand Strategy. And starting Monday, she'd be supervising all senior account managers, including Derek. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of October air. Margaret Pierce, she was still getting used to her new last name, stood in front of her closet, considering her options with strategic precision. She selected a charcoal gray suit with a silk emerald blouse, paired with her favorite heels that added 3 inches to her height. Professional, authoritative, undeniable. Today wasn't about revenge.
It was about respect.
The company-wide email had gone out Friday afternoon, announcing the organizational restructure. Margaret had seen it before it was sent. Effective immediately, Margaret Pierce will assume the role of Executive Vice President of Brand Strategy, overseeing all client accounts and senior management staff. Please join us in welcoming her to the leadership team. Her phone had exploded with texts. Patricia sent champagne emojis. Her daughter called, screaming with pride. And from Derek? Silence. Then, at 11 p.m., a single text to Jonathan that he'd accidentally sent to the company-wide thread before quickly deleting it. "Are you serious right now?" Now, walking into Elevation Marketing Group's glass-walled headquarters, Margaret felt a calm confidence settle over her. Jonathan squeezed her hand in the parking lot. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for this my entire life," she replied. "I just didn't know it until your employee told me I was too old." The morning executive meeting was first. Margaret entered the conference room where 5 senior account managers sat around the table, Derek among them. She watched his face drain of color when she walked in, watched him glance frantically between her and Jonathan, watched the realization crash over him like a wave. "Good morning, everyone," Jonathan began. "I want to formally introduce our new EVP of Brand Strategy, Margaret Pierce. Most of you have worked with her over the past few months and have seen firsthand the transformative impact she's had on our client relationships and creative output." Margaret, she stood, meeting each person's eyes around the table. When she reached Derek, she held his gaze steadily.
"Thank you, Jonathan.
"I'm excited to work with this team in a more structured capacity. Over the next few weeks, I'll be meeting with each of you individually to review your accounts, discuss your professional development goals, and identify areas where we can strengthen our approach." Derek's jaw was clenched so tight, she could see the muscle jumping. "I believe in collaborative leadership," Margaret continued. "I'm not here to micromanage or undermine anyone's work. I'm here to elevate it, and to ensure we're delivering the kind of strategic, emotionally intelligent campaigns that make clients choose us over every other agency in this city. My door is always open. Literally, I don't believe in closed-door offices. Transparency and communication are how we build trust. After the meeting, Derek cornered her in the hallway. This is insane. You can't seriously expect me to report to you. Margaret turned to face him fully. I expect you to do your job, Derek. The same job you were doing before, just with additional oversight and mentorship. Mentorship. He laughed bitterly. From someone who doesn't understand how modern marketing works? This is a joke. My father must be loving this. You destroying my career to get back at me. Your father and I are divorced, as you know. This has nothing to do with him. Margaret's voice remained level. And as for understanding modern marketing, I suggest you review the Riverside Healthcare campaign I developed last quarter. It increased their patient inquiries by 47% and won us 2 industry awards. Perhaps we have different definitions of understanding. Derek's face flushed. I want to request a transfer to a different supervisor. Denied. Margaret kept her tone professional. You're one of my strongest account managers, Derek, despite your attitude. I'm not interested in pushing you out. I'm interested in helping you reach your full potential. But that requires humility, something you're going to have to develop. Over the following weeks, Margaret proved herself in ways that silenced even the skeptics. She overhauled the pitch process, introducing emotional storytelling frameworks that won them 3 major clients. She instituted wisdom sessions where older employees mentored younger ones and vice versa, creating cross-generational collaboration. She personally saved the TechFlow account when Derek's team nearly lost it due to a tone-deaf campaign that ignored the client's core values. In that particular meeting, with Derek present, Margaret had calmly dissected where the campaign went wrong. You focused entirely on features and trends, she explained, without understanding that TechFlow's CEO built this company because his mother couldn't access affordable technology as a teacher. The campaign needs to honor that origin story. That's what creates emotional resonance. The revised campaign, incorporating Margaret's insights, not only saved the account but resulted in a contract extension worth $2 million. Derek was forced to watch his stepmother, the woman he dismissed as too old, consistently outthink, outperform, and outearn him. But something unexpected began to happen around month 3. During a particularly difficult client crisis, Derek had made a critical error in judgment, promising deliverables his team couldn't meet. He'd come to Margaret's office, expecting reprimand. Instead, she closed her laptop and asked, "What happened?" He'd explained, defensive and frustrated. And Margaret had listened, really listened before saying, I made that exact mistake in 1994. Lost a major client because I overpromised. You know what I learned? That honesty and managing expectations is more valuable than bravado. Let's call the client together and reset the timeline realistically. I'll back you up. They'd made the call. The client appreciated the honesty. The project was saved. Afterward, Derek lingered in her doorway. Why did you do that? You could have let me fail. Margaret looked at him thoughtfully. Because I'm not interested in your failure, Derek. I never was. What you said that night at dinner hurt me deeply, not because I believed it, but because it revealed how narrow your worldview was. Age isn't obsolescence. Experience isn't irrelevance. And I'm not your enemy. I was an ass, he said quietly. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. Yes, you were, Margaret agreed. But you're also talented, creative, and capable of growth. The question is whether you'll let pride stop you from becoming who you could be. By month 6, Derek had become one of Margaret's most reliable team members. He sought her advice, incorporated her feedback, and even publicly credited her insights in client meetings. The transformation wasn't instant or complete. Old habits died hard, but it was real. At the company holiday party, Derek approached Margaret and Jonathan with something that looked like genuine warmth. I owe you both an apology. A real one. What I said, how I treated you, Margaret, it was wrong. You've taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 5 years of thinking I knew everything. Margaret smiled, gracious in victory. We all have blind spots, Derek. The trick is being willing to see them. Later, as she and Jonathan danced slowly to jazz music, he whispered, "You've changed this entire company." Changed him. Changed me. We changed each other, Margaret corrected, resting her head on his shoulder. That's what happens when people see you for who you really are. At 60 years old, Margaret Pierce had proven that she wasn't too old for anything. Not for love, not for success, not for completely rewriting the narrative of her life. She was just getting started.